Hi, folks. My name is Barbara. I'm only here to introduce our very own speaker, and then I'm gonna hang around to answer questions if you're gonna have any. I hope you all got a chance to join the opening session a few hours ago, led by Camila, who's also on this call. If not, all the recording is going to be available for everyone's use in a short time. I also wanted to encourage you to use our Slack channel if you have any questions or if you're keen to start up a discussion after this session. And for today, we have John Starr, who's already present. He's a program manager for open source science initiatives. And he has a very intriguing topic of his talk today. Head first, no foot first. On a second thought, I'll sit on the edge of the pool and let my feet dangle. Intriguing. I'm curious to see where it's going to take us. John, you got 30 minutes to start your chat, but if you need a little bit more time, you're welcome to continue. Folks, if you can join past that time, you're also welcome to stick around. Otherwise, you will be able to access the recording afterward. Just a brief reminder about the code of conduct. All of us have access to it in the intro email sent with the invites to those sessions. John, floor is yours.
Thanks, Barbara. I'm also interested to see where this takes us. I am going to share my story in open source because I've been doing this for 10 years. That was my thinking, at least. Share my journey through open source up to being program manager of OSI. But I am very open to having an engagement with anyone who's here. So if you want to talk about something, or if you want me to talk about something specifically that I touch on, throw it in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand and unmute. Happy to talk here. And then I'll share this. If you ever want to reach out to me for anything, feel free. This QR code will take you to some very OSI, open source science initiative specific links, but my email is just right down here. Feel free to email me about anything. Happy to talk. But yeah, let's see, open source. So like I said, I've been doing this for 10 years, a little more at this point. I got into it in terms of contributing in 2013. But when I'm thinking back to it, I participated in open source projects in like the early 2000s, or would become open source projects. If any of you remember SETI at Home, where you would put like this cool screensaver up and your computer would try to search for aliens, search for extraterrestrial life, and it would look really, really neat and it was really engaging, a lot of fun. That was turned into an open source project called the Berkeley Open Infrastructure for Network Computing. And that would, like, I did that as a kid. My parents put it on the computer. It was a lot of fun. But eventually, like 10 years after doing that as a child, I turned around and started to become a contributor to BOINC. And disclosure here, I don't code at all. I cannot code to save my life. Well, GPT now helps with that a little bit, but so if I don't code, how do I start contributing to an open source project, particularly one as complex and tech heavy as BOINC? For those who don't know, Berkeley Open Infrastructure for Network Computing, giant distributed computing infrastructure that's permissionless. Anyone can log on, like set a distributed computing project up, and then send out what are called work units across this giant. It's essentially a giant supercomputer. It's in the top 20 or top 30 most powerful supercomputers in the world when you add up the flops. And people, institutions, individuals, universities use around the world. It's a very technical project. But I am not a technical person, so I get in there and I start trying to organize community around it. At the same time, I'm not a technical person, and this is a very technical project, so you get in there and there's a lot of people who are very technical people, obviously, and it's very intimidating. So one of the first things I did was try to get involved and then kind of backed off, right? That's kind of where hey, I'm just going to dive right in first. And then on second thought, maybe I'll just see what it's like in there before going in. So it's this experience I had with BOINC, which I still contribute to. I ended up creating communities and ultimately a nonprofit out of it. I'll talk about in a second, but the intro experience was very rough, and I don't think that is unusual for a lot of people getting into open source. So for anyone new to open source, I would expect that. That would kind of be a piece of advice. Expect to be uncomfortable when you first jump in. And if you're not uncomfortable when you first jump in, oh man, you had a great experience. So appreciate that. And if you have these thoughts of like, hey, maybe this is not what I want to do, try to work through them, because you're probably not the first person to have those thoughts, because it is a very different world versus going to university and then going out and going to the corporate space. Something that helped me stick with it, particularly with BOINC, which again, very specific, very technical community, which is an amazing community once you're part of it, once you get into it and start to know what's going on. But one thing that helped me is I really knew what I wanted to do. And I wanted to contribute to science. I wanted to make science bigger, better, faster, engaging, more engaging for the public, more inclusive. And BOINC was a very direct way to achieving those personal goals of mine, which ties into what open source is. At the root of it is developing software for your own personal needs. I'm just not developing software, I'm developing communities. And other sort of resources I'll get into. But because I had that personal drive, it wasn't about upskilling to a job. It wasn't about learning a new thing. It was about proactively contributing to something I thought was meaningful. I kept going. I did step back a little bit and take a wider look at what was going on. But eventually, all those other things did happen. I did gain skills that I use today at my job at NumFOCUS. And I've built a great professional network out of all this open source engagement and open source participation. But I wasn't contributing to do those things. I was contributing to do something I love. Yeah, so this is ultimately where I got into open source and still stick around. And some of these things that resulted out of just wanting to build community and building resources. For example, I created a podcast with a friend from Australia who I still talk to, who's still friends with. In fact, him and I and 5 other people co-founded this nonprofit called the Science Commons Initiative, where we eventually founded this, 2 or 3 years ago, but we had known each other since like 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17. We met people along the way. It's a nonprofit looking to use open source software and technology to engage the public in science. And it's just another way to continue contributing to something that I find very interesting, very important, which is improving science, again, making it faster, making it more inclusive, and making the public part of the scientific process. And the people who are part of this are wonderful people who I've known for many years now and have a very wide background. We come from very different places. And so that has been very fun to be a part of. And if I had, when I first started participating in BOINC, if I had just stopped instead of just like taking a step back, I would have never met these people. I would have never make a nonprofit that I think is really starting to make an impact. Like one of the initiatives we're working on right now is bringing BOINC, this giant permissionless infrastructure, into high schools, grade schools, essentially anything pre-college, for those of you not in the US. And that's going to be really fun. We can get kids excited about science in the same way that I got excited about science through SETI at home by looking for aliens on my screensaver. And again, none of that would have happened if I had just stopped versus just taking a step back and moving a little slower. I wish it would have been, I could just dive right in and start doing some really cool stuff right away, but that's not necessarily how open source works. One of the other things that came out of my participation with BOINC is another open source project. This is part of a world that some people are not super enthusiastic about, but I'm super passionate about economics. And this is a way I can contribute to both science and economics. And it is just another open source project that is built on top of BOINC, where if I had never contributed to BOINC in that first place, I would never have found people who are doing other stuff with this open source tool that I found so engaging. So now this is a whole nother thing building communities, still doing what I'm good at, still learning different skills along the way. Like, for example, I ended up writing the white paper for this twice. But it's a very long, technical, not technical. It's like between super technical documentation and a abstract of a project. So in order to write this thing, I had to communicate with developers and project organizers and mechanism designers and develop communication skills that I wouldn't have had otherwise were I not contributing to open source. And this paper is fairly well received. It's a fairly large project, this one. And again, all of it because I dove into something and then got a little burned by diving headfirst into open source, and then decided to take a step back and kind of sit in the pool, see what's going on. And then once I figure out what's going on, start moving in from there. And just to really showcase how not technical I am, this is my GitHub. You couldn't really tell I contribute to any any projects here. It's mostly the Gridcoin stuff, but I have no commits, no contributions. But I am a core contributor to multiple projects, these three being some. There's actually another one here that I didn't bring up, but this is an open source project, still obviously dealing with science, but is also a startup. So it has brought me into the VC world, into the corporate world. They're trying to build technology, and I get to build communication channels, go to market strategies, open source community, that sort of thing. All because a long, long time ago, I found these guys. I had a passion. I found a project that aligned with that passion, and I started contributing to that project. Definitely way too strong at the beginning. Learned about how strong I should probably be contributing to it. Learned a lot about the open source project, the methodology of open source, and then started accelerating how I contributed. Outside of these projects, there's, first of all, distributed computing is a giant ecosystem. It's a giant community in itself. The cryptocurrency ecosystem is massive, and a lot of it is garbage. So I'll be the first one to tell you that, but there's also some really cool projects there. The what's called DeSci community is very young, but also amazing. There are some very neat connections and partnerships being built with some leading journals and corporations and companies who are looking to use new technology to enable open science. And because I'm a contributor to these open source projects and not necessarily beholden to a company or corporation, I'm able to choose where I spend my time. And part of that time is spent organizing the larger DeSci community. So I'm organizing an event right now, actually, in Colorado, in Denver, that will be taking place in the end of February. We just had an event that I helped organize called DeSci Boston, where we bring a lot of people together and have them talk about new technologies and open science. Yeah, and so it's just a very powerful way to contribute to, again, something that I want to contribute to, not something I'm being told to contribute to. And by having that passion first, and then that desire to upskill and learn new things, and then get paid for those things second, I'm able to find the right places to go to start getting paid for my time. And NumFOCUS is a great example of that. I am so happy and so proud to be someone who's contributing to NumFOCUS, who's used all the skills I've learned over these years through open source, just contributing randomly to stuff I enjoy and getting paid along the way in random bits and bobs. But now being able to contribute to a large nonprofit organization that supports a giant sphere of open source research projects. It's a great feeling to be able to do that. And I question if there's two things that would have stopped me from being in the place I am right now. One was jumping in head first and then getting kind of whiplash from that, or yeah, just like it's like you're getting in a car accident. You accelerate really quick and then you stop. So if I had stopped right after that, I would not be where I am right now. Yeah, I forget the second one. That's really the big one. If I was not contributing to a passion I wanted to do, I would have probably not been where I was, because there's burnout. There's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of no, part of the whiplash is noise in open source communities that isn't always it's not something you want to do, right? And you don't have a boss, you don't have an HR department. You can go, hey, this person's just kind of being mean, or I don't know how to deal with this person. A lot of communities now have code of conducts, which were not super popular when I was starting in open source. And they have code of conduct committees, and there's starting to be ways to deal with that sort of social dynamic. But I think the easiest way to deal with it is contributing to something you're passionate about. You want to do regardless of what's going on in the background. Yeah, so that's essentially all I have to talk about. Is my journey through open source. The jumping first into a pool and then kind of testing the waters, and then kind of just coming to terms with the fact that, hey, you should probably sit at the edge of the pool. Well, you know what? You do what you do. You do your own way. But I think a good way to do it is to sit at the edge of the pool and really look around and see everyone else that's in the pool, see what projects exist that you might want to contribute to based on your passion and based on nothing else. And then once you find a couple projects that are based on your passion, then start to bring in the other stuff. All right, which one of these projects is going to let me work in a field that or doing something that I really want to do? Which one of these projects is going to have things for me to do that I don't know how to do yet, and want to learn how to do? And we'll have someone there to help teach me along the way. If you do these things, I think you'll be able to find projects that you can stick with for years and years, and you can find people within those projects that you can end up building some really cool stuff with. This, I'll move this out of the way. The SCI, we're not big. We're not out there getting massive donations, but there's 7 super passionate people, all with our own jobs outside of it, who would have never met if we didn't find a passion through this original open source project, and then just continue forming a relationship together. So I don't know if there's any questions or anything maybe I should expand on. I'm happy to talk about anything or answer any questions if people are new to open source, or just looking for anything. I got thoughts about most stuff. I'll talk about the weather if you want.
Yeah, can I just say thank you for the talk? So it's quite interesting what you explained as your journey, and it just made me think about when I decided to get or switch career into tech. I'm still at the beginning of that journey, and now I'm learning about open source. And the first thing that comes to mind is, right, I need to learn to code and then contribute code. And that's my thought process. A lot of people probably have the same thought process, but it's quite different the route that you took. So what led you to take that route rather than the coding or the technical
Yeah,
route?
that's a great question. I tried to learn to code so many times. It's just not in my blood. And it was such a relief to me to find out that these projects need help outside of coding, because I'll try, and I'm still trying. Like, I'll still tinker. Like I said, with GPT, I'll have an idea and I'll try to get something to work. And I've gotten things to work, and then it's like one file of just like this massive code block, and I would be so embarrassed to shut that down. But yeah, it's not what I want to do, and there's a lot of people like me, I think, that don't want to code, but also want to contribute to a lot of these projects that are so impactful in the world around them. And for the longest time, you had to learn to code, and it there was so much talent, so much mind power that just went into a different industry because they didn't feel like there was a place for them to contribute to open source projects. So I was very lucky in that I found a project where there was a need for community building and kind of a desire for it. And it was built around a technology that was also kind of social at its core. This distributed computing, the Voight platform has gamification to it. So there's teams and there's competitions already. There just wasn't a ton of central community around it. Yeah, so short answer, I don't like coding.
No, I mean, it's like he said, most of these projects do need people that deal with the project aspect of it, the community aspect. So, yeah, definitely do need different type of people and different type of skills.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because you make me think of the phrase, I don't know if this is still used, but GitHub is your resume. I'm pretty sure there were several talks today about how, the upskilling, the GitHub, you contribute to GitHub until you build up a backlog of contributions, then you can use that to go get a job somewhere. That requires coding for a lot of it, because if GitHub is only just starting to incorporate project management tooling and ways to show off that you're contributing projects that aren't code based. So being able to keep track of and get a reputation in open source without coding, without having that 1,000 commits or 10,000 lines of code behind you, was a huge challenge, which I hope is going to stop being a challenge soon. And another thing I hope is that you can actually build up a resume in open source software starting from when you're really young and never have to leave open source. You can stay there and get paid. You can find the grants easily. You can get sponsored as a freelance developer or freelance contributor by Microsoft or Google or Facebook or one of the big corporations that usually takes people under their wing, and stick around and sell some of your time to help someone else in something you might not be super passionate about in order to buy some of your own time back to continue contributing to something you're super passionate about. So I don't know necessarily where I was going with going there, but there's a lot of potential with contributing to open source with sticking in the ecosystem and the people you meet and sticking with them and not necessarily leaving just because there's a 5 or 6 figure job waiting for you outside of it.
Yeah, I think one key takeaway from your talk, and you've said it many times, is passion. Find something you're passionate about. And that's definitely something that will stay in my mind. So yeah, thanks for that.
Definitely, absolutely. It's thanks for the question, engagement. If anyone else wants to chat, feel free. It's so in science, this is a little bit of a tangent, but in science, there's a lot of brilliant people that get into science. Just absolutely brilliant. They're great at math. They're great at problem solving. They're great at conflict resolution, critical thinking. And they then go to university and they hone these skills and they learn the complementary skills. And then they get their degree, whatever degree it is. They realize, oh my, only like 1% of PhDs get hired, go on a tenure track or something like that. There's not a lot of positions for them. And so they get sucked up. This brain power gets sucked up by another sector or some other sector. And usually, I don't know if it's usually, a lot of the time is the financial sector. And they become like quant stock traders. It's like the dream is that you can go to open source. Yeah, it would be amazing to become a tenured professor, but no, start contributing to an open source project. Contribute to NumPy, contribute to any other project out there, and get paid for it. So you don't need to go be a banker. You can still contribute to society with your passion. Because you see a lot of these people then get super jaded about everything they learned about the whole academic system, and I could ramble on forever, but open source is a great escape hatch for that sort of thing. I see a hand up. Go ahead.
Hi. This is Aishwarya here. Actually, I had a question for you. I have seen many roles, like you said, that you don't code, but you got in a tech job. So, what is your job? Like, if you don't code, then how you got a job in tech? Like, you are a community manager or you are a developer advocate. Like, what is your job? Like, we can
Yep,
also get some ideas. As I'm also not
sure.
that good in coding, and I'm also looking for a job. I know Python and SQL.
So I'm a program manager, which means I work high-level strategy, and then how do we implement that strategy towards a goal.
Okay.
So I'll work with the rest of the NumFOCUS team to find, well, the OSI team to define our goals, figure out how we're going to get there, and then figure out the small steps to get to those goals in the end. That's something I love to do. I love to organize and plan and then execute on a plan. Incredibly nerdy about that. Other ways I've seen people contribute, there's a huge lack of design capability in a lot of these projects, like logos, communication resources, websites. They're incredibly technical. They're built for a builder. They're built for a developer and not a user. So someone who isn't part of the community and doesn't already know what this software is will come in and look at this website and be like overwhelmed and just leave because they have no idea what to do. Which is one of the things OSI is trying to do, is trying to bring a researcher who might not know what some of these tools are and connect them to developers of the tools so that the developers can build more user-friendly tools. So design, web design, user experience design, developer advocacy, the two you mentioned were good. Writing, copywriting, so that white paper I showed you is a great one. And there are also really easy ways to start getting involved in some of these projects, because almost every project has the need for someone to help with writing something or editing something. And then community management is a big one, because a lot of these open source communities, whether you're the community manager, a co-manager, or just someone who runs a sort of like an event once a week, a podcast or a gaming night or something like that. These open source projects are built on community. That's their whole thing. The whole shtick of open source is community, not corporation. So if company A is building software, they're going to build that software and they don't really necessarily care who's building it. If one person leaves the company, they'll hire someone else and they'll build the software. With these open source projects, some of these people are they know the project, so that they're like part of the code themselves, but they're not community people. They don't want to build a community, but they still need that community to help build. So they're not the only person who knows the code. So that there's someone else there to help manage and maintain. That is a huge need in the space, is community organizers.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I'm so happy that someone here is wanting to get involved in open source and not on the coding side. That's very exciting. Is everyone else here on the software development side? Or is there anyone here who's not a software developer? Also, see thumbs up. I'd be curious, Jose, do you already contribute to a project?
No, I do not contribute to any project right now.
Do you want to?
Well, I honestly, I had never considered it, but I need to look into it. Like you said, find a project that I'm passionate about. I don't know what's out there really, but I need to start looking into it.
Yeah, and even take a step further back, find a field you're passionate about, and then see if there are projects in that field. So maybe you like AI, find an open source project on AI. Maybe you like 3D rendering, find an open source project on 3D rendering. Maybe you really like finding prime numbers. I know there's a lot of open source projects that look for prime numbers to do some really geeky math stuff, which is super fascinating, but not in my wheelhouse. Yeah. You should definitely look into it. I'm glad you're here then.
Definitely will.
It's a great place to learn. Yeah.
Definitely will. Thank you.
Also, Vermont, great place for open source and tech.
I
Come
love
visit
it.
your brother.
Maybe a little bit too cold for me, but yeah, it's a beautiful
Yeah.
state.
I was, I was just gonna jump in and say as well. There's a lot of like NGOs that are or think tanks that are like open to like voluntary contribution on the GitHubs and whatnot. And oftentimes I was gonna say like even if you just don't contribute to like a tooling, like I don't contribute to tools, but like I kind of work like I'm like part-timing for a think tank, which like I'm the main research associate, but like we work with other NGO think tanks, and then we share like our GitHubs and models. So I think like finding a cost area there is also kind of like a good driver instead of like oh, I really want to contribute just to like Matplotlib or something.
Yeah, I've never heard of these actually. Do you have any resources for that? I would love to look into it.
Not particularly open source, but there's a few like open source like NGO. For example, I used to code contribute for like humanitarian OpenStreetMap. So they do disaster mapping for like they deliver disaster map for like Doctors Without Borders and whatnot when earthquake happens, and then I also contribute for like food security think tank, and yeah, I could send a few out, but yeah, oftentimes when I used to work in startups, sometimes the NGO also attract really senior developers. So they actually have like a much higher standards tech stack than some crappy startup.
Interesting. Yeah. That's awesome. It makes me think of like projects that are citizen science, like Folding at Home, or Folded, like games that aren't necessarily software, but anyone can contribute to. And I think we're running short on time, so I won't go off a tangent on that.